July 2014, Benton Hills, Tallahassee. A gunshot at 11 in the morning. A professor slumped in his car. His ex-wife was called in that same day. She said she didn't know anything. By the end of this story, you'll know exactly who paid for the bullet and why it took a decade to prove it. On the morning of July 18, 2014, Dan Markell pulls into the driveway of his home in Benton Hills, a quiet residential neighborhood in Tallahassee, Florida. It is a Friday. The sun is up. The streets are empty in that particular way that college towns go quiet in the summer. Dan has already dropped off his two sons, ages 4 and 5, at preschool. He has been to the gym. He is on the phone with someone, mid-conversation, when he notices something unusual. There is a person in his driveway, someone who should not be there. He mentions it to the person on the phone. He never finishes the sentence. A single gunshot shatters the driver's side window of his car. The bullet strikes Dan Markell in the face. A neighbor hears the shot. He steps outside and sees the garage door open, Markell's car still running, the window destroyed, glass scattered across the driveway. He walks closer. Through the broken window, he can see Markell, covered in blood, slumped in his seat, not responding, but still moving, barely. The neighbor also sees something else, a silver Toyota Prius pulling away from the scene. Moving fast, it turns the corner and disappears. No one gets a plate number. No one gets a clear look at the driver. The neighbor calls 911. He tells the dispatcher that a man has been shot, that he is sitting in his car bleeding from the head, that he is not responding. The dispatcher does not convey the full severity of the situation to emergency responders. Paramedics arrive 19 minutes later. 19 minutes for a gunshot wound to the face. By the time they reach him, Dan Markell is barely clinging to life. He is rushed to Tallahassee Memorial Hospital. Doctors work on him through the afternoon and into the night. He dies 14 hours later, in the early hours of July 19th. He is 41 years old, a father of 2 boys who will never see him again. There is no sign of robbery. Nothing has been taken from the car, from the house, from the garage. The front door is locked. Dan's wallet and phone are still with him. His gym bag is in the back seat. Whatever happened in that driveway, it was not a crime of opportunity. It was not a burglary gone wrong. It was not a random act of violence in a neighborhood where random violence does not happen. Tallahassee police say it plainly within 24 hours. Dan Markell was the intended victim. This was a targeted killing, carried out in broad daylight in a college community against a man who by every account had no enemies. Benton Hills is the kind of neighborhood where people leave their doors unlocked, where children ride bikes on the sidewalk and professors walk to campus. A planned execution here at 11 in the morning with the sun shining in the neighbor's home, that is not just a murder. That is a message. Or it is desperation. Investigators were not yet sure which. The same day Dan was shot, police brought in his ex-wife, Wendy Adelson. She came to the station. She was told there had been a shooting at her ex-husband's home. She appeared shocked, upset. She told detectives she had been driving around town that morning looking at houses with a bond agent. She said she heard about a shooting on the radio, but did not know it was Dan. When the detective told her that Dan had been taken to the hospital and was not going to survive, Wendy broke down. The detectives asked her the standard questions. Where were you this morning? Who were you with? Do you know anyone who would have a reason to hurt your ex-husband? Wendy said Dan was difficult sometimes, that he rubbed people the wrong way, but she could not think of anyone who would want him dead. She mentioned that he had friends but was not always well liked. She said she had no indication of any threat. The interview seemed genuine. Wendy appeared to be in shock. Detectives noted nothing overtly suspicious. They let her go. But they did not stop looking at her. Think about what investigators are facing at this point. A law professor, not a practicing attorney, not someone putting criminals behind bars, shot in his own driveway in one of the safest neighborhoods in Tallahassee. No forced entry, no robbery, no threatening messages, no angry ex-students, no debts. By every account, Dan Markel was a kind, intelligent man. He was beloved by his students. He had just begun a new relationship with a law professor from New York University. He was moving forward with his life. The only source of conflict in Dan Markel's life was his divorce, and the only people who openly hated him were the members of his ex-wife's family. To understand why, you have to go back to the beginning. Daniel Eric Markel was born in Toronto, Canada in 1972. He was exceptionally smart, educated at Harvard, Cambridge, and the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He earned his law degree from Harvard in 2001, clerked for a federal judge on the Ninth Circuit, worked at a prominent law firm, then joined the faculty of Florida State University's College of Law in 2005. He taught criminal law. He published in the New York Times. He spoke at legal conferences across the country. In 2009, he wrote an academic paper titled Privilege or Punish: Criminal Justice and the Challenge of Family Ties, a work exploring how family relationships intersect with crime and punishment. It would prove to be one of the most prophetic things he ever wrote. Dan met Wendy Adelson on JDate, an online dating site for Jewish singles. He was 33. She was 26. She was studying at the time, but would later teach at Florida State University as well. They married in 2006. They had 2 sons, one born in 2009, the other in 2010. By 2012, the marriage was disintegrating. In September of that year, Dan returned home from a work trip to find the house nearly empty. Wendy had taken the children and most of the furniture. One of the few items left behind was a mattress. On top of it, divorce papers. Dan would later describe the separation in court filings as a Pearl Harbor-style ambush and a Visigoths-like sacking of the marital home. Wendy changed the children's surnames from Markel to Adelson, her maiden name. She removed one of the boys' middle names, a name that had been chosen in honor of one of Dan's late relatives. It was as if she was trying to erase every trace of Dan from his own children. The divorce was finalized in 2013. Custody was split 50-50, but Wendy wanted to move back to South Florida, to Miami, where her parents, Donna and Harvey Adelson, lived alongside her brother Charlie. She had a job offer at a law firm there. She wanted to take the boys with her. Dan said no. He went to court and obtained an order prohibiting Wendy from relocating to Miami with the children. The boys would stay in Tallahassee. The relocation battle was over. Dan had won. This was the trigger, and the Adelson family did not take it well. Wendy's mother, Donna Adelson, was furious. In the 15 months preceding Dan's murder, Donna sent her daughter a flood of emails filled with venom for her ex-son-in-law. She called Dan an idiot, a bastard. She gave him nicknames: Jibbers for his habit of talking nonstop, Elvis for what she perceived as his swollen ego. "You suffered under his reign," Donna wrote to Wendy in May 2013. She referenced what she believed was his narcissistic personality disorder. Wendy's brother, Charlie Adelson, was a periodontist, a successful dentist who ran a practice called the Adelson Institute with his parents in South Florida. He was wealthy. He was protective of his sister. And according to testimony that would come years later, he made jokes about hiring a hitman to take care of the Dan problem. In early 2014, Dan escalated the situation further. He filed a motion to prevent Donna Adelson from being alone and unsupervised with the children, citing her relentless pattern of making disparaging remarks about their father. The court filing was a direct attack on Donna's role as a grandmother. It was one thing to lose the relocation battle. It was another to be told she could not be trusted alone with her own grandchildren. The hatred was documented. It was escalating, and it was about to turn lethal. Before we get to how this unraveled, if this story has you hooked, hit subscribe. Because the chain of people behind that single bullet is something you won't see coming. For an entire year after Dan Markel's death, the investigation went almost nowhere publicly. Police put out rewards, first $1,000, then $3,000, then $25,000. An independent reward of $100,000 was offered for any information leading to an arrest. Tips came in. None produced a solid lead. The silver Prius was the only physical clue. But police did not release images of the car to the public for a full year. When they finally did, in 2015, they asked for the public's help in identifying it. By then, the trail had gone cold in the eyes of most observers. But behind the scenes, investigators had been working with something most people did not know about. When they pulled footage from cameras mounted on Tallahassee city buses, cameras designed to monitor traffic, not solve murders, they found the silver Prius on tape. And on that tape, visible through the windshield, was a small device mounted on the dashboard. A toll transponder. That single detail, a small plastic box designed to automatically pay highway tolls, was the thread that would unravel everything. Tallahassee has almost no toll roads. A vehicle with a toll transponder in that part of Florida almost certainly came from somewhere else. Likely South Florida, where toll roads crisscross every major highway. It meant the Prius had not been bought or borrowed locally. It had been driven in from hundreds of miles away. Investigators began pulling rental records. Every Toyota Prius rented in the state of Florida in the days surrounding July 18, 2014. The search was massive, but the results were specific. The records led them south, to Miami, to a rental agency, to two men who had rented a silver Prius just days before the murder. Sigfredo Garcia and Luis Rivera. Garcia was 26 years old, a member of the North Miami chapter of the Latin Kings gang. Rivera was the chapter's leader, already under federal investigation for racketeering. Neither man had any connection whatsoever to Dan Markel. Neither had ever been to Tallahassee. Neither had any reason to drive 5 hours north to kill a law professor in his driveway, unless someone was paying them. In June 2016, nearly 2 years after the murder, Sigfredo Garcia was arrested in Broward County and charged with first-degree murder. Days later, Luis Rivera was arrested as well. Prosecutors called it what it was from the start: murder for hire. The Prius told the story. Rental records confirmed Garcia and Rivera had picked up the car in Miami. Toll records traced their route north through Florida. On the morning of July 18th, they followed Dan Markel from the moment he dropped his children off at preschool. They followed him to the gym. They waited. Then they drove to Benton Hills and parked near his house. When Dan pulled into his driveway, one of them got out of the car, walked to the driver's side window, and fired a single shot. Then they got back in the rented Prius and drove 5 hours back to Miami. But two gang members from Miami do not drive 500 miles to execute a man they have never met out of personal motivation. Someone hired them. Someone connected them to the target. Investigators needed to find the link between the gunman and the Adelson family. The link was a woman named Catherine Magbanua. Magbanua was the mother of Sigfredo Garcia's 2 children. She had an on-again, off-again relationship with Garcia that stretched back years. But during one of the off periods, before the murder, she had begun dating someone new, a wealthy dentist from South Florida. His name was Charlie Adelson. Charlie and Magbanua were in a romantic relationship at the time of the murder. Magbanua knew Garcia. Garcia knew Rivera. Charlie knew Magbanua. Neither Charlie nor Donna Adelson had ever met Garcia or Rivera directly. They did not need to. The chain was built through Magbanua, the woman who sat between two worlds. Investigators mapped the phone records and the money trail. On the day of the murder, the very first call Sigfredo Garcia made after the shooting was to Catherine Magbanua. According to Luis Rivera's later testimony, Garcia told her on that call, "Everything is done." In the weeks and months following Dan Markel's death, Magbanua began receiving cash deposits into her bank account, always under $2,000 at a time, just below the threshold that would trigger mandatory bank reporting. The deposits totaled $44,000 over the course of a year. Then, starting in September 2014, 3 months after the murder, She began receiving checks directly from the Adelson Institute, the family dental practice. Those checks were signed by Donna Adelson. Cash deposits can be hard to trace. Checks signed by a specific person are not. The prosecution's theory took shape. The Adelson family had offered $100,000 for Dan Markel's murder. Charlie arranged it through Magbanua. Magbanua arranged it through Garcia. Garcia recruited Rivera to help. The two men drove a rented Prius from Miami to Tallahassee, carried out the killing, and drove back. Magbanua was paid in installments, some in cash, some in checks from the family business. Think about that chain for a moment. A mother-in-law who despised her daughter's ex-husband, a brother willing to act on that hatred, an ex-girlfriend caught between a dentist and a gang member, two hitmen willing to kill a stranger for money, 5 people, 1 bullet, and a rented Prius with a toll transponder that tied them all together. Luis Rivera was the first to cooperate. He agreed to plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for a reduced sentence. He was sentenced to 19 years, to run concurrently with a federal sentence he was already serving for gang-related racketeering. His testimony, detailed, specific, and damning, became the foundation of the prosecution's case against everyone above him in the chain. Rivera described how Garcia had first told him they were driving to Tallahassee for a drug robbery. It was not until they were on the road, hours into the drive, that Garcia told him the truth. They were being paid to kill someone. Garcia showed him a photograph of the target, a man Rivera had never seen before, a law professor, a father of 2. Rivera asked why this man had to die. Garcia told him the woman wanted full custody of the kids. Rivera said he told Garcia they should just rob the woman instead. Garcia said no. The job was the job. Rivera testified that the agreed price was $100,000. Garcia told him they had received $5,000 up front. When Rivera asked where the money came from, Garcia said it came from the lady, referring to Magbanua. After the killing, Rivera said, Garcia complained that Magbanua was not paying the full amount. Rivera said he suggested they rob her to get the rest. That is how desperate and transactional this arrangement had become. The FBI got involved. They wiretapped communications between Charlie Adelson and Catherine Magbanua, and then they did something bold. They sent an undercover agent to approach Donna Adelson directly. The agent contacted Donna, pretending to be connected to the people who carried out the hit. He implied that the hired killers had not been fully paid, that there was unfinished business. He wanted to see how Donna would react. Donna called Charlie immediately afterwards. In the recorded phone call, she told her son that someone had contacted her about a matter involving both of us. She referenced money that had not been paid. She referenced the people involved. Prosecutors would later describe that phone call as a confession, the moment Donna Adelson confirmed, in her own words, that she knew exactly what had been done and who was involved. The trials unfolded over the course of nearly a decade. Sigfredo Garcia went to trial in October 2019. Luis Rivera testified against him, detailing the drive to Tallahassee, the photograph of the target, and the payment structure. The jury found Garcia guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole, plus 30 years for conspiracy. Catherine Magbanua was tried alongside Garcia. She denied any involvement. The jury could not reach a unanimous verdict. The vote was reportedly 10-2 in favor of conviction. A mistrial was declared, and Magbanua remained in jail pending retrial. In May 2022, Magbanua was retried. This time, with additional evidence and testimony, the jury convicted her on all counts: first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and solicitation to commit murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole, plus 2 consecutive 30-year sentences. Facing the reality of dying behind bars, Magbanua made a decision that would change the entire case. She agreed to cooperate with prosecutors and testify against Charlie Adelson. Charlie had been arrested in April 2022 and charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy, and solicitation. His trial began in October 2023. He took the stand in his own defense, a risky move. He told the jury that he had nothing to do with Dan Markel's killing. He claimed that after the murder, Magbanua had come to him and told him that if he did not pay, the people who killed Markel would come after his family. He said he was being extorted, that he was the victim, not the orchestrator. The prosecutors played the wiretapped phone calls. They presented the financial records. They called Magbanua, who testified that Charlie had arranged the entire thing. They called Rivera, who described the chain of command. And they presented one more piece of evidence, testimony from Wendy Adelson's ex-boyfriend, Jeffrey Lacasse. Lacasse told the court that in July 2014, Wendy had shared something with him confidentially. She told him that Charlie had explored all options to take care of her relocation problem, and that he had looked into having Professor Markel killed. The cost, she said, would be around $15,000, or possibly $50,000. Lacasse could not remember the exact figure, but he was certain she made the statement. After 7 days of testimony and 3 hours of deliberation, the jury found Charlie Adelson guilty on all 3 counts. He dropped his head onto the defense table as the clerk read the verdicts. First-degree murder, conspiracy, solicitation. On December 12, 2023, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole, plus an additional 30 years each for the conspiracy and solicitation charges. 1 week later, his mother tried to run. On the evening of November 13, 2023, exactly 7 days after Charlie's conviction, Donna Adelson and her husband Harvey were arrested at Miami International Airport. They were carrying one-way tickets to Vietnam. The tickets had been booked on November 7th, 1 day after the guilty verdict. Vietnam has no extradition treaty with the United States. Recorded jailhouse phone calls later revealed that Donna had been discussing countries with no extradition in the days between her son's conviction and her arrest. Donna was charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy, and solicitation. Her trial was initially set for September 2024, but was delayed when her attorney withdrew on the first day of jury selection. The trial finally began in August 2025. Prosecutors painted Donna as the mastermind, a controlling, vengeful matriarch who hated her former son-in-law so deeply that she helped orchestrate his murder to get her grandchildren closer to home. They played the FBI sting call. They presented Donna's emails to Wendy, the ones filled with contempt for Dan. They called jailhouse informants who testified about things Donna had said behind bars. Donna's defense attorney, Jackie Fulford, called her a meddler, not a murderer. An over-involved grandmother who said terrible things about her son-in-law but never crossed the line into conspiracy. The jury deliberated for about 3 hours. On September 4, 2025, Donna Adelson was convicted on all counts. When the first guilty verdict was read, she gasped aloud and collapsed into sobs at the defense table. The judge ordered the jury removed and told Donna there would be no further outbursts. On October 13, 2025, Donna Adelson, 75 years old, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus a consecutive 30-year sentence. In her statement to the court, she insisted she was innocent. She called the trial a miscarriage of justice. She said she had never received a parking ticket in her life. The judge interrupted her repeatedly, citing what he described as an utter lack of remorse. Dan Markel's father, Phil, addressed the court. He spoke about his son's 2 boys, the grandchildren he and his wife Ruth have been unable to see for years. After the arrests began in 2016, Wendy Adelson severed all contact between the Markel family and the children. She changed the boys' last names from Markel to Adelson, claiming it was for their safety. Florida's grandparent visitation laws are among the most restrictive in the nation, and Phil and Ruth Markel have had no legal path to even petition a court for the right to see their grandsons. Phil Markel's final words to Donna were a single question. My only short question to Donna: was it worth it? He turned from the podium and looked at her, She sat at the defense table, tears in her eyes, looking back at him. 5 people are now in prison for the murder of Dan Markel: Luis Rivera, Sigfredo Garcia, Catherine Magbanua, Charlie Adelson, Donna Adelson. All convicted, all sentenced. Both Charlie and Donna have filed appeals. Neither has been granted a new trial. Wendy Adelson has never been charged with any crime related to Dan Markel's death. She has denied any involvement. She testified at her mother's trial in 2025 that she had no information about a plot to kill her ex-husband. She also testified that she had not spoken to her mother since November 2023, the month Charlie was convicted, because Donna had pressured her to testify in a way that would help her brother, and was upset when Wendy's testimony was not sufficiently helpful. In her final question on cross-examination, the defense attorney asked Wendy to confirm that anyone involved in Dan Markel's killing should be held responsible, including her. Wendy did not answer directly. Prosecutors have never stated publicly whether Wendy Adelson remains under investigation. Phil Markle said after Donna's sentencing that he wants everybody and anybody who had anything to do with Dan's death brought to justice. Until that day happens, he said, he will not be fully happy. Dan Markle wrote about criminal justice for a living. He studied how families intersect with crime and punishment. He believed in the system he taught. The system took 11 years to convict the people who ordered his death, and even now, the question of whether everyone responsible has been held accountable remains unanswered. His 2 sons grew up in that time. They carry a different last name now. They live in a different city. They have been separated from their father's parents for nearly a decade. The silver Prius that a neighbor saw fleeing the driveway on that Friday morning, the rental car with the toll transponder that should not have been in Tallahassee, was the thread that unraveled everything. Without it, 2 hitmen from Miami drive home and disappear. Without them, Catherine Magbanua is never questioned. Without her, Charlie Adelson is never charged. Without Charlie, Donna Adelson never sits in a courtroom. 1 rental car, 5 convictions, 11 years, and a father who never came home from his driveway. If this case leaves you with one question, it is probably the one prosecutors have never fully answered. Did Wendy know? 5 people are in prison. 1 person has never been charged. Drop your thoughts in the comments. There is another case where a family tried to make a murder look like something it wasn't. But this time, the victim left behind a clue that no one, not even the killers, knew existed. That story is next.